Welcome to this daily Meditations author interview. My name is Mark Longhurst. I'm the publications manager at the CAC, and today I'm excited to be speaking with the Cuban-American theologian Kat Armas. Kat is the author of Abolita Faith and most recently Liturgies for Resisting Empire, Seeking Community, Belonging, and Peace in a Dehumanizing World. And I really love this book. It's beautifully written, and it contains powerful insights about discovering the liberating message of the Bible amidst the structures of injustice and empire. Well, Kat, thanks so much for joining this conversation today. I'm so excited to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with the title of your book, Liturgies for Resisting Empire. At the CAC, we're very interested in this relationship between contemplation and action. And I hear that relationship a bit in the title and in your book, Liturgies, prayer, and then resisting empire, action. So I'm going to throw a lot of questions at you. How do you understand empire? How do you understand liturgies? And how can liturgies help us become people who, as the subtitle puts it, seek community, belonging, and peace?
Yeah, well, those are great questions, and I'll try and get to all of them. But yeah, so I'll start with liturgies. I feel like when we're talking about something like empire, which I will define in a second, but when you're talking about something like empire, which is so big and so nebulous, right? There are as many definitions of empire as there are people who define it, and also something like empire that is so pervasive, right? Injustice is so big, and all of these sort of things can feel so overwhelming. And so I love the idea that as we begin to explore and sort of break this down, I sort of open each chapter with a liturgy, a reflection from typically a non-Western culture, and also an invocation, and then I close it off with a benediction, a prayer of reflection. And the reason for that is because, like I said, when you're talking about something so heavy, yeah, it can feel a bit overwhelming. And so I like the idea that we enter the space sort of together. We enter the space, and that's the beauty of a liturgy, right? A liturgy is, I mean, going back to the original definition, it is the work of the people. And so when you are praying the same prayers, when you're sort of calling upon the same sort of divine spirit and asking the divine spirit to come and sort of be in presence in sort of the same way, yeah, I think there's something really powerful about that, right? Because these systems are so big and so pervasive and so overwhelming, that it's a reminder that, hey, we're in this together, and also we need each other. And I think that's a big part of it, because something, I was raised in an immigrant Roman Catholic church, and so I was raised with liturgy as part of our practice, and our daily sort of just being was through liturgy. And there was something about my community living in the midst of exile together, praying the same prayers, sort of, asking the same questions. But more than that, when we didn't have the words, when we didn't know what to pray, we could borrow each other's. And I think that's the beauty of liturgy, right? So here I am talking about these really, big, nebulous, pervasive things, and also saying, you might not have the words to know how to enter this space or pray about these things, but here, borrow mine. And I think that there's something really powerful about that. It is sort of there's a contemplation aspect of it, but there is also, even in the liturgy, a communal, right, sort of movement in that. So yeah, and so to answer your second question, empire. Um, so historically, empire has been sort of like, the definition of it has been the relationship between a dominant ruling state and a lesser powerful one, right? So it's been a relationship of power between nations, right, historically. And it's also sort of been the relationship between an emperor, sort of a ruler, and the people that he rules over, right? But with time, this started to become less about a specific people, but more about the ambition behind expanding rule and expanding reach, right? So this emperor now not only wanted to rule his own people, but then wanted to rule distant peoples from distant lands. And so me, as a theologian, right, I'm not a historian, nor am I a social scientist. Although, when you are a theologian, I think you're kind of both, all of those things, right? But as a theologian, I'm interested in how the ambition behind empire, sort of this ambition to rule, to dominate, to seize land and people, right? That sort of thing. I'm interested in what the ambition, how that ambition has woven its way into our culture, right? The way we engage with ourselves, with each other, particularly with the divine, right? And that is because this system of empire, what began before the Roman Empire, but I sort of focus on the Roman Empire because that's the context of the New Testament, right? And also because the Roman Empire was sort of the empire par excellence that all other empires wanted to model themselves after. And so I'm looking at sort of Roman and a little bit before, but mostly Roman and after, right? Our current context. And I'm looking at how this sort of system with these ambitions to dominate and rule and seize land and seize people and seize culture, how that has woven its way into everything that we are, how we understand not just our relationships with each other and ourselves and divinity, but our relationship to time, to money, to leisure, right? I think that was a big one that I was really interested in, our relationship to everything, how we understand reality. And so, yeah, that's my sort of my definition of empire, how I'm looking at empire in my book, and also why liturgy, I think, is important when looking at something like empire.
Wow, gosh, thank you so much for helping pull apart some of those threads. I really loved how you engaged the Bible in this book because you talk about the complexity of the Bible, how it's been used and abused by empires, from the Roman Empire to the current empires, and also how it is a library of sacred stories of liberation and healing and God with us in the midst of injustice and violence. And so this connects to our daily meditations theme this year and the work we're doing, which is good news for a fractured world. And what we're trying to do is highlight ways that the Bible can be a source of healing and liberation rather than the breaking of the world, the fracturing of the world. So I wanted to ask you, given the complexity of the Bible, how is it still good news for a fractured world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what I love about the Bible is that it is a spiritual text, but it is a deeply human text, right? What you see throughout the pages in scripture are people wrestling with what it means to live within different political realities, spiritual realities, to live in the midst of exile and freedom and liberation, to long for things, to prophetically declare. I mean, it is a deeply human text, right? And I think the problem is that throughout history, interpreters have sort of wanted to remove the humanity out of the text and just focus solely on the spiritual realities. And I mean, you look at something like the death of Jesus, and I mean, a lot of times, and throughout history and throughout biblical interpretation, it has become a solely spiritual thing, right? And not the reality that Jesus was killed by the state, right? Jesus was a victim of empire, quite literally, right? And so, what I love about the Bible is that when we read it, through human eyes, right? As human people wrestling with these very questions that the biblical authors wrestle with, right? What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to long, right? What does it mean to wrestle with the complexities of being disconnected from your people? What does it mean to live under an oppressive system that is trying to exploit? I mean, all of these deeply unsettling and also very human wrestlings. We see all of that in the Bible. And so I think that when we look at it through that lens, it can offer us so much, right? So much more than just a disconnection from reality, but of really what it means to, I mean, you see this in the story, particularly I'll focus on the New Testament for now, but you see as in the stories of God's people, right? Particularly in someone like Paul, where as he is living in the midst of exile, trying to, establish and this new community of Jesus followers and trying to pastor them, or however you want to look at the life of Paul. But he is in one moment, he's resisting empire. And then in the next moment, he's sort of bending his knee to it. I mean, there isn't this one. I used to say things like, Paul was this anti-imperial, whatever, or Jesus was a feminist, and I no longer use these blanket statements because Jesus, in his human form, was a person wrestling with the everyday realities of someone living under a political system that was exploiting his people, right? And the same thing goes for Paul. And so you see when you kind of take a step back, you see people living and trying to make sense of their existence. And that is it's so relatable, really, for lack of a better word, for us now. And so through that lens, I think the Bible can be a very liberating text because you see how, I in my first book, Abuelita Faith, I look at different stories of women in the Bible, and you see how so many women were quite literally trying to survive in scripture. Like so much of their stories, again, has been over spiritualized, like the story of Ruth and Naomi, for example. But really, their story is a story of survival, quite literally of trying to survive, right? In the systems of their world. And I look at that, and to me, that is such a liberating reality coming from the background that I come from, and seeing how my grandmothers and the women in my life were also trying to survive. And that is in and of itself a sacred and holy endeavor. Right? Like, we don't need to over spiritualize survival because survival, as we see in the Bible, is holy and sacred. I mean, you have women who are doing all sorts of morally questionable things in order to just quite literally live to eat the next day, to marry so that they can be, taken care of until they and their people can be taken care of. And they're included in the genealogy of Jesus, right? Jesus calls them blessed. I mean, you have all of these stories of survival. And so, yeah, I think that through that lens, the Bible is an extremely liberating text because you see people just trying to survive and God calling that holy and blessed. And then you look at so many of the systems that abuse and exploit, and you see so many surviving and attempting to survive and thrive, right, under these systems. And that is in and of itself a beautiful and sacred thing, right? We don't need to over spiritualize that in order for that to be a beautiful and sacred thing. And so, yeah, despite the way that the Bible has been used to exploit, I think the reality that it is a text of people surviving under empires, I think makes it, yeah, a beautiful, liberating thing.
Tell me if I'm hearing you correctly. I'm hearing you ask the Bible, ask us, can we read the Bible and allow the characters just to be complex human
Yes.
beings? I want to ask about domination of the earth as well, because you point out very helpfully that empires don't just dominate people, it's the planet is suffering too. And then you've got this really interesting part where you write about the earth as coming to our aid as an ally in this work of reconnection and communion. So can you say more about how the earth can be our ally in greater belonging, greater communion and connection?
Yeah, I think it's always so important to connect back with the natural world, because the natural world has all the wisdom that we need for all the things. I always say, I'm like, anything you need to learn, you can just look to the earth and you can just find all the wisdom that you need to find. And I love that we see this. It's this passage, and I wrestle with it in this book and also in my second book because I was so utterly captivated by it. But it's in Revelation in this sort of battle scene, and suddenly you have, the earth coming, like you said, to the aid of this woman, and, sort of the woman that is, that the devil or the dragon is chasing this woman, and, she hides, she goes to the wilderness for reprieve, and then it is the actual earth who, saves her from this dragon. And, it's sort of like I've never really heard many sermons talk about this. I've never really heard many people talk about this, but I think it is such a powerful imagery for the way that the earth and creation sustains us, right? The way, I mean, if we quite literally need the earth, creation in order to live, to breathe, to eat. And we see and how, empire has not just destroyed us, but destroyed the very planet. I mean, we are in a climate crisis, because of greed, because of so many things. And these resources are finite, right? They are not infinite resources. I hate to even call the earth a resource, right? Because that again is imperial language. But yes, I mean, it's just so incredible how much of the Bible is so intertwined with creation and the natural world, and not just as a means, right, to teach us some sort of lesson, but as a way of just existing and being. I mean, going back to the Genesis story, and this is the beginning of the story, right? Is a garden, right? It is people in communion and in communal flourishing with the land. And then here you have, I mean, currently where we're at right now, we're talking about water resources that are potentially, we're potentially losing our water resources in the next, I don't even know how many years, and it's not that far away. I mean, it is dire. It truly is dire. But again, the earth, I always say that the earth takes care of us even when we don't take care of her. And I think that there is something so humbling about that. I think about Ecuador, and I write about this in the book, how it is the first country to actually give nature her own rights. And so you can actually sue, on behalf of nature. And they've done that in Ecuador and they've won. There was a case where they were dumping, stuff into a river and pollution and polluting this river, and someone sued, an indigenous group sued on behalf of this river, and they won, and so now you're no longer allowed to. And so I think that that is such a, I bring that up because what a beautiful vision of, communal flourishing, of seeing creation as a participant, as an agent in this life. And that's what we see in Revelation. We see that the earth participates with us. And we even see this, and Paul talks about how creation groans alongside of us. I mean, creation is mourning. And so yes, I think it would really change us fundamentally from the inside out, if we fully understood, and viewed creation in that way, and really, really devoted to caring for her. And in that, also learning from her, right? Developing a relationship with the natural world so that we can learn. And also, yeah, I mean, that would really humble us in so many ways. I mean, that's been such a big part of my journey, in my sort of decolonizing journey. We moved out to a small, hobby farm, and we have animals and goats and chickens, and really it's been such a beautiful lesson for me to, I mean, it's very humbling, a lot of work, but to just learn the rhythms of the earth. I have roosters now that wake me up in the morning, and that is now how I'm learning to live by the rhythms of the earth. But yeah.
Oh gosh, that's great. And I live in the country in Massachusetts, and I never thought I would be a rural person. I loved seeing like
Right?
the excitement of the city, and
Same.
now I'm like, how could I ever
Right.
not live in this be able to hike and
Yeah,
small
I'm with
towns, and
you.
everybody kind of knows you, which is annoying but also wonderful because you
Yeah.
belong to each other. Anyway,
Totally.
I'm glad you brought it to slowing down and living closer to the earth, because one of my favorite chapters, and this will be the last question I ask, is rejecting hustle, embracing slowness. And I just thought this was so profound. You write about time, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but you say you want to inhabit time as if it's not something that's slipping away, but instead be held by time.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a helpful reframing. And so I wanted to ask, how does empire consciousness, empires, how does it commodify our bodies, our labor, and how can rest and slowness be part of the antidote to healing?
Yeah, I think that is one of the most pervasive, I think, for every single one of us. Like I said, violence, we've sort of absorbed it in our language and in what we consider normal and all the things, but man, our relationship to time and a relationship, because to work and to productivity, I mean, all of that is so intertwined. Our relationship to leisure, I mean, I believe that that is one of the ones that it really, to our deepest parts of our bones, affects every single one of us. We have sort of um completely begun to see the world as, and ourselves as, just people racing against linear time, right? And actual linear time was a creation, an invention of empire. Again, this is one of empire's sort of narratives, and that came about, when they were trying to, back when they were, through the sea, and when they were on their boats and trying to find, other lands, and time began to shift because you had to sort of make it at a certain time, and it was a race against time, and that's where it all sort of began. But that hasn't always been the case. I mean, throughout history, time has been understood as something linear, right? Something cyclical, right? And of course we see this in the patterns of our day. We see this in the patterns of our weeks and our months and our year. We return to things over and over and over. But when time changed into something linear, I mean, it's like you're always chasing some sort of future goal. And then, of course, that seeps into the way that we understand productivity, and you add capitalism into that. And so then, of course, you're racing against time because time is money, and every second is, to try and extract something. And I mean, it really is so pervasive and so yeah, embedded into how we understand everything. And so yeah, I think that, to reevaluate our relationship to time, to reevaluate our relationship to productivity, to reevaluate our relationship to capitalism, I think is so important in sort of resisting empire and really just becoming more whole humans, right? I talk about moving out to the farm, and because I really wanted to understand this. I really wanted to undo this sort of what I call the gospel of hustle, where you're always trying to keep up but you never can, because there's always more that you can do, or there's always more to sort of achieve. And again, these are all imperial ideals, achieving and arriving and conquering, right? But yeah, I moved out to the farm, and still in the mornings when I'm trying to rush out of the house, I'm still, telling my daughter, hurry, she's 4 years old, and, toddlers take forever to put on their shoes. And so hurry up and put on your shoes, and then even that I'm thinking, no, this is again, just in the smallest little thing of trying to rush out of my house in the morning, of trying to rush my 4-year-old to put her shoes on. And I love that she looks at me and she says, Mommy, remember, I am not a fast person. I am a slow person. And, oh, that has become sort of a prayer for me. Mommy, I am not a fast person, I am a slow person. I think what she's actually telling me is, Mommy, I am a person. I am not a machine. I am a person. And I think that we have so conditioned ourselves to think of ourselves and others and life and everything as machines, right? We just need to continue to do and extract and produce. And yeah, and so to really, break that, I think it takes so much contemplative work and so much work in general, right? But I think that yeah, I think that is really the sort of the movement toward liberation on a day-to-day sort of minute by minute basis, because to do that requires attention, it requires reflection, it requires that we pause enough that we can think, right? And that we can be, is particularly in our current context. And so we are constantly being bombarded with things purposely, so that we, sort of, it numbs us into inaction, into overwhelm, into, and so if that is a deliberate media strategy that we're all sort of bombarded by, what would it mean to live, in resistance to that? And I think that that would involve attention and reflection and contemplation and slowness, and being people that sort of resists the speed and the spectacle of empire at every turn. And then I think, yeah, requires, a constant hour by hour reorganization of our mindsets and our, yeah, and our day to day. And in the book, I write about even how leisure, has been co-opted by capitalism, and now we pay to rest, right? And so yeah, so what would it look like? I don't know, to resist all of these things. And I think we're all on that journey. I don't have the answers, but I'm trying.
Yes. Well, I think maybe your daughter has wisdom for us, which is that I'm a slow person, but also I'm a person, as you
I'm a
said.
person.
And, yeah, I could just get so busy in my task, and then I'm like, "Oh, I'm not a human,
Right.
achievement machine. I am a person."
I am a
So thank you
person.
for
Yeah.
that reminder to all of
Yeah.
us. I wanted to end and just ask if you'd feel up for reading one of the liturgies as a benediction, as a way to close. Would that be okay to do?
Yeah, absolutely. May we go forth knowing that we are woven into a tapestry of kinship that stretches wide and far into this world and beyond. May we carry this knowledge into every place we inhabit, every moment that we breathe. When we feel ourselves shrinking, may we remember that we belong in all spaces, in all ways. We are loved not for what we do, but for who we are. We are seen, and it is good. Amen.